So a great concept that everybody wants to have, no coach wants to have a mediocre performing team, or a CEO wants to have an average performing team. So I'm sure it's something that everybody comes to you saying, I would like to be in a high performing team or like to build a high performing team. So when somebody starts that journey with you, or that question, where do you go next with that question?
I hit them with a question of my own.
Okay.
I ask people to think in that circumstance of a team that they identify as being high performing, because I want to understand from them, how are they defining high performing? So I ask them to think, it could be a team that they have been part of. It could be a team that they admire from a distance. It could be a team in their own field of work, or it could be a team in a completely different walk of life. But I ask them to think of that team. And I ask them to think about, in their mind, what makes that team high performing? Why have they chosen that team to use as their own example? What are the behaviors? What are the characteristics? To the extent that they can identify it, what does that team stand for? What are the principles that guide how they operate and therefore how they perform? We chat that through. We list it out. We categorize it all. And that becomes our lens. That becomes the lens then through which we look at the team that they may be part of, or that they may be leading. See if we can identify which of those characteristics and behaviors and so on already exist in that team or not. Where are the gaps? And it's a very powerful insight to kind of start to self-reflect, to start to uncover for yourself, but what does make for high performance? That's where I would start the conversation. I would go on, obviously, from there, but that's where I would start it, getting the person themselves to think about, well, what is high performance as I'm thinking about it? And have I got it covered? Or am I missing some really important components in my own definition, in my own understanding of what I'm trying to see in terms of high performance?
So it's a really good starting point, because I think this sort of goes back to your point about starting to bring clarity on definitions, right? So this is where what you're saying is the journey starts with bringing that clarity, and what you were asking them to do is effectively do benchmarking of what would they benchmark themselves against. And so I can imagine somebody, again, I'll put a CEO hat on or an investor hat on, saying, okay, I have some sports teams that I think are high performing, maybe because they won trophies, or they seem to have a really good team morale, or they really seem to have a lot of success as a team in terms of branding, popularity. So everyone, to your point, everyone will gravitate towards a specific set of variables that they perceive to be a definition of high performing. But they don't know why that is, right? What they don't know is that they know the what, but they don't know the why and the how, right? Which is probably where you end up as your next phase of this discovery. And so when somebody says, okay, I've figured out my variables that make me believe what high performance or high performing looks like. And in a business sense, they're pretty well defined. In a non-business sense, you can identify those. What happens next? How do they go through the discovery path on, how do I know if I've got a high performing team? What should I be looking at beyond the metrics? Because sometimes they may say, look, my metrics are not great, which is why I want to become high performing. I know I can be better, or we can be better. So where do you take them next?
Yeah. So there's a great piece of work, and that I absolutely live by in the work that I do in high performance. It's a piece of work that was done, that might be familiar to people looking in. Piece of work done by a gentleman called Patrick Lencioni. And now the way that Lencioni frames his work in this area is he looks at what are the things missing from teams that make them less than high performing. That's the angle with which he approaches the work. I look at it the other way around. It's exactly the same, but I come from the other angle, which is, what are the things that all high-performing teams have?
Yeah.
Now, Lencioni frames it in literally in terms of a pyramid, and with the base being the entry point to getting on the high-performance pyramid, high-performance ladder. And each component moving up to the pyramid allows the next level to become possible. And there are 5 components in there. So when I've spoken to people about identifying for themselves a team that they believe is high performing from the outside looking in, and we talk about all of those components, I then give them this framework. And it's interesting to see the words may not be the same, but many of the fundamentals that they've identified will appear in Lencioni's pyramid. But there's usually 1 or 2 that don't. And that's typical. That's indicative of the fact that that's why there are few high-performing teams out there. Because until you understand the components, you can't become high-performing.
Yep.
But this is an important start of the journey, right? Understanding what the fundamentals are so that you can then say, and when I get teams together, whether it be a senior corporate team or whether it be a sports team, I ask them, well, we've gone through this process to identify where do they believe this team that they are part of is at in terms of the Lencioni pyramid. And that's super important, Rohit, as well, because they know the day-to-day life in that team better than anybody. They are the best to ask that question of, and allowing them to see where each other feels they are in terms of their journey to high performance is really important, because that becomes the starting point for the work that they will need to do in order to get to the top of the pyramid. And the starting point may be very different for different teams. Some teams are not even on the pyramid yet, right? They don't even appear. And I very often draw it up and ask them to put a sticker on, right? And sometimes the sticker doesn't even appear. It's on the floor because they've not even made it there. But it's a very, very powerful framework to order your thinking. But even more than that, it is not the framework that stays on the page. It's a framework that you can then use in practice, because once you've figured out your starting point, you can then start to examine what are the practicalities, what are the behavioral shifts, what are the mindset changes that we're going to need in order to become more high performing than we currently are.
I think, look, I have to believe that the team, as they're going through this exercise, there are people like sort of looking around and saying, well, hang on, are we on that? Are we on the pyramid or not? And there may be disagreements between people saying, well, I don't think we're quite there yet. And that in itself probably is quite revealing in the process. And then the team leader, whether you're a CEO or whether you're a coach or the manager, whatever the title you play, that might be a pretty massively revealing thing for them as well to observe and identify. So I can imagine how powerful this exercise can be for a lot of people within the team, managing the team, outside looking in. But as a team, does that often lead to just the fact that you take them through this exercise? Does that lead to an almost alignment of misalignment? Is that the first place where you sort of say, you know what, we're all aligned, that we're misaligned? Or am I reading too much into it?
No, I think, there are a variety of outputs, right, from undertaking this exercise. And that's why it's a powerful exercise to do, because we need to understand within a team, where do we see ourselves, right? And if we see ourselves in a different place, that's material, right? We need to figure that out. Why is that? Why are you seeing us on one part of the pyramid when I'm seeing us on a different area? That's important. And a lot of it is about then how are we defining the different words that form the concepts within that pyramid, right? We may have a very different definition. You may think we have established ourselves at a certain level because you're defining the words that you're seeing in a different way to that with which I'm defining it. And that's material, right? That's material. We've got to have a common understanding in order to move forward together. And that very often happens, that people will see the team at slightly different places to one another within that team. That's quite common. It also happens where there is absolute alignment across the team on where they see themselves. They are very clear on what their starting point is, usually defined by what their issue is, if I can put it that way. But we don't have any of that in the team, and there's universal agreement on it. That's our sticking point, or we've really got to do some work on that before we give ourselves chance to move up the pyramid.
This may be an unfair question, but you know me, I'm gonna ask for numbers. So if you just gut feel over the years, what percentage of teams fall into that last bucket that we're aligned on whatever the things that we need to work on, like roughly? For those listening in, like say, do I make it into that cut?
So were they totally aligned as a team on where they
even
think
if
they...
Yeah, even if that they know that there's work to be done, but there is alignment in the group pretty quickly that we're on this pyramid. Here's where we're at. Here are the issues, and there's clarity on where they all are at that point in time.
Yeah, I would say total alignment is probably 40%.
Oh wow,
Total alignment.
that's higher than I thought.
But actually minimal variation, right? So within 2 steps of the pyramid, most people are. You see, if you give people the chance to talk about this kind of stuff, and you give them a framework that they can hang their thoughts on, as it were, the teams know when they're performing and when they're not performing.
Yep.
And if you give them the language to understand what makes for high performance, they're pretty good at self-identifying.
Yeah.
You know, the great news for CEOs out there, if we're talking about the corporate world, the great news for CEOs is if they have the desire to invest in their team in this area of work, they can, and they do, in my experience, make massive strides towards high performance, because there is awareness out there in teams. But without the setting with which to discuss and work on that awareness, you're wasting it, right?
Yep.
But if you allow your team and you join them on the journey of exploring that and giving them the opportunity of defining it and working towards high performance, the results are massive in my experience.
I'm very encouraged to hear that 40% have got higher degrees of alignment, because I would have thought the number would have been a lot lower. But then the second piece that you're referring to, which is, it is important to have that awareness. So I think there, if I was simplistically taking what you've said so far, is that there is a large percentage of the population that may not be aware where they are as a team, and then some that are highly aware but maybe misaligned, and then some who are aware and aligned, right? So that's that 40% cohort. And so the question really comes down to is, as a leader, the first thing what your counsel to CEOs or investors listening in, or anyone, quite frankly, in leadership role is, how well do you think your team is aligned on where they are in that journey to peak performance, to high performance, right? I think that increased, because as I have come across in different facets of business where CEOs wish to believe that they have a high performing team. And so sometimes it leads to false precision, inaccuracies, made up stories. And I think that's a big sort of aha when that happens. And then this exercise. And then there are people who are also very harsh on their teams. And so then there is the other end of it, which is the team may be very high performing, but the leadership wants to, create this stretch goals or create this notion of, no, we're not quite there yet. And so in both cases, there's a natural tension and strain, I have to imagine.
Yeah.
That further feeds into this equation. So there is awareness. The question is, which end of the spectrum do teams fall when this awareness comes about? Is that an interesting way to think about, or do you have a different perspective?
No, I think it's a good way of thinking about it, and I think it ties back to the first question that you asked me, which is, what's the starting point when a CEO reaches out to me and asks me about high performance and is trying to figure it out for their own team, understanding the definition, right? What is high performance? What are the components that we know all high performing teams possess?
Yep.
And that's important, because otherwise, how can you possibly define whether you have a high performing team or not, unless you know what all the components are?
Yep.
Even if you know some of them, that's not enough.
Yep.
Having that framework becomes super powerful, and it really jumps off the page. It is not a kind of abstract theoretical framework in the classical sense that that many things are, especially in the field of personal and team development. Why I like Lencioni so much and have so much respect for the guy is this really is translatable into practice. You can see whether or not the team is displaying the behaviors that are necessary to move up that pyramid of performance. And of course, if you're not seeing the behaviors, then you know there's a mindset issue, because the behavior will only ever follow a mindset.
So let's get into it, David. I'm sure the audience is like, all right, guys, come on, let's
what the hell is on the pyramid? They might have already left and gone and looked it up, by now.
Yeah, probably, which is good. So why don't we get into it? So what are those 5 steps or 5 layers of the pyramid, and where would you start?
Yeah, so it'd be interesting how people who are listening in have maybe started to try and think about what some of the components will be. Right at the base, well, let me start off actually at the top. Where are we heading to? What's at the very top of the pyramid? What's the purpose of all this? Purpose of any team is to produce results. So this, one of the other reasons why I like this framework so much is it's not fluffy, right? This is not about having all sorts of nice things to create a nice existence for a team. This is about producing results, whether that's hitting your bottom line, whether that's maximizing your profits, whether that's hitting your targets, whether that's winning a championship, whether it's winning the cup, whatever it is. A team exists to produce results. And the definition of producing results will vary depending on the business that you're in, the walk of life that you're in, and so on. But where we're heading to is high-performing teams produce and go beyond the results that they've set for themselves as an expectation. So that's where we're heading to. Now, what's the sequence of behaviors, the sequence of events that we know all high-performing teams have in order to get to that result level that they've set for themselves, or even exceed it? At the bottom of the pyramid, the most fundamental is trust. The members of that team must have absolute trust in and of one another. Now, it sounds obvious. It's a little word, right? So it sounds easy. It's the most fundamental. It's the most difficult to achieve in most teams. Think about what having trust means in practice. Right? You've got to let go. You've got to get out of your own head. You've got to get out of your own ego. You've got to get out of your perhaps desire to shine. And you've got to get alongside a colleague. You've got to get alongside somebody else. It's difficult for a number of reasons, not least because if you think about what do we spend our time together doing? Let's take a corporate team. A good corporate team, senior team, will come together for operational reasons because there are decisions, immediate, short-term decisions to make in order for the business to run, to thrive. Good teams come together for operational reasons. Better teams also come together for strategic reasons. So this is getting out of the day-to-day. This is getting out of the weeds. This is looking ahead. This is looking 3 years, 5 years, maybe sometimes 10 years from now. Where do we want to be as an organization? What is that going to take? How does that inform some of our operational decisions? Good teams come together for operational reasons. Better teams come together for operational and strategic reasons. The very best teams, the high-performing teams, come together for a third reason. And that's what I define as team health. They come together for no purpose other than to build connectivity, to deepen awareness of one another, to work on things that are purely about how do we operate as a team? Where are we doing well? Not from a business performance perspective, from a team performance perspective. Where are we doing well? Where are we not doing so well? What is it that's allowing us to do well? What are the behaviors that we're displaying? Where are we not doing well? And what's getting in the way? What's happening there? All of this kind of team investment is about building trust. It is an ongoing process. So the very best teams, the ones that give themselves a chance at high performance, are consistently developing trust within themselves because they accept and they believe that, as Lencioni would tell us, it is the most fundamental step. Without it, you can forget the rest of the journey to high performance. You're never going to get there. Yeah. This is the one to invest in because it releases the possibility of everything else that follows to the top of that.
Yeah. No, and as you were saying, I was taking notes, but also reflecting simultaneously on how important that trust element is, and it sort of applies to any team really, whether it's a small team of 3 or a company of 30,000, doesn't really matter. I think trusting the person that is next to you in that conference room, on the team room, on the sports field, the cross-functional players that are all across the hallway, whether it is the back office or the front of sales, whatever it is, that you've got to have that, the teams that I'm reflecting on that do well. And one thing I will say is that when that trust happens, I can think of situations when that result at the top of the pyramid has been achieved or surpassed. And there are teams I can think of who had moments of trust where it just worked like magic. But then, as you say, if you don't continue working on it, continuing to build that connective tissue, it disappears and something else comes in the way. And it goes back to more of the strategic or the tactical, which is let's finish the project. And it's extremely goal oriented, but it's not building that longer term connective tissue, which is, I think, what you're getting at.
Absolutely. Putting people in place doesn't create a team. It creates a group of people. So trust, it's vital. It has a real purpose. Culture is the intersection between values and norms.
Subscribe to the People Quotient channel, where leadership meets action. Powerful conversations with practical insights that you can use right now. See you in the next episode.